morale, employee insecurities. And so how do we work, and how does D&I and HR maintain a positive relationship with our ERG, BRG leaders, especially during times like this? Maryanne, if we could start with you.
Yeah, no, I love this question. And so I'm going to throw it back to you because, again, we're here for you. And I want to see who's in the room. Raise your hand if you are an ERG leader. Oh, nice. Look around. Look around. Right, keep your hand. Good. Thank you. Raise your hand if you are in the HR function. Okay, those of you raising your hand, stand up. If you are in the HR function, stand up. Those of you that are an ERG leader, look at these people and you better walk away with their name, email, phone number, LinkedIn. You think I'm kidding. Thank you so much for standing up. The reason why I wanted to highlight that is because we need to start building a bridge between our ERGs and the HR function. Do you have a clear understanding of what the HR strategy is for your company? Crickets, crickets. I'm going to take that as a maybe, I don't know. Okay, so that's step number one. Do you understand what the function is, the HR function is, and what the strategy is, and how that plays out within your ERG and your ERG goals? Building that bridge is so critical to address the issues that we're facing. You talk to ERGs, the very first thing I always hear is what? Say it again. Crickets. Crickets. Okay, besides crickets. Money. Do you feel that? How can you collaborate with your HR leaders to build that bridge, to understand that you're on the same mission, on the same track, to meet those clear objectives? And at the end of the day, my friends, it's all about ROI. How are you keeping accountable and meeting those metrics to make sure that if you ask for more money, you're showing proof that it's working? And that's one thing to take away.
Awesome. Thank you. Sid?
Thank you. So I want you to ask yourself the following question as you are thinking about your ERG, BRG, ARG strategy. Are you a source of energy to your company, or are you a use of energy to your company? Because yes, as what Jeff mentioned is absolutely correct. We are seeing not only headwinds. I mean, the GDP number came out this morning. It was below expectation, and that's usually an early sign that that companies may start pulling back on their budgets. But here's what I've learned over the years, is that I interact with about anywhere from 10 to 15 of the Fortune 1000 CEOs every month, over 200 per year. We probably interact with more CEOs than anybody else. And it's the constant, and what I hear when I talk to the CEOs is they're trying to figure out where can they put their budgets in a way that it gets them the best ROI. And the first thing they're gonna do is they're gonna say, well, wherever we're putting our budgets, where we're getting positive ROI, we're gonna protect that budget. We might even increase the budget, even in a downturn. But if you are a use of energy, guess who gets cut first? And so that means that as you look at the structure of your ERG, BRG, ARG groups, it means you have to ask yourself, how am I being a source of energy to our companies so that they can then look to you and say, you are part of our growth strategy. You are part of our expansion strategy. You are making a difference, and therefore, when you ask not only for more support, they might even surprise you for that. And the other thing I'll mention, and I love the fact that Jeff shared that he is the executive sponsor for the Latino ERG group at PNC, because Jeff is a leader who has a P&L, he has pull, he has influence. And so you all need to look at your executive sponsorships and ask them, do they have credibility? Do they have pull? Do they have influence? Because the stronger your executive sponsor, the stronger is going to be your voice for not only ERG sponsorship, but also making that case. And so you're going to need to think about those strategies as you're looking at how you can be a source of energy. And source of energy could be anything from how you're helping with recruiting, how you're helping with marketing, how you're helping with the culture, how you can even give them ideas that can help them to increase their revenues. A few years ago, there was an ERG group. A few years ago, about 4 years ago, there was a company that actually gave their ERG groups a contest and said, we want to do a Super Bowl ad, and we want you to help us with the best Super Bowl ad. And the ERG groups participated. They were all a source of energy. They went with it was actually the Diverse Abilities group that actually won it. And they took their idea and they spent millions of dollars and put it in the Super Bowl about 4 years ago. So you can see the power of what you can do, but the key thing you need to look at is how you can be a source of energy to your company and not a use of energy from your company.
Yeah, really awesome nuggets. I think about the return on investment and then that P&L. It's the one part that for me, as Sid mentioned, try to drive. And so if you go in as HR partners or ERG leaders and talk to your line of business leaders and say, what return have I driven to each and every one? If you get a deer in the headlights look, we're taking more than we're giving. And so there's a sense of accountability. It's not a good to have. There's meaningful impact in what our ERGs, I'll say words matter. I mean, at PNC, it's as simple as we have one. It's an EBRG, an Employee Business Resource Group. And we do that because the connection constantly from employee to community to business needs to be visible in the vision that we have, how we execute, and in the plan that we drive. And so as you think about that ROI, go into any line of business leader and talking about retention rates that have been improved, promoter scores that have been improved, productivity that's been improved, inclusiveness and belonging that's been improved. You're talking about key measurements that is important to every P&L owner of every single organization. And so as you go back and start seeing that connection, it's important that we have these self-accountable moments. At least I continue to do, and again, push other EBRGs within our organization and others to make sure that we're striking that right balance. So we're not always asking, but there's a constant giving, because you realize the more you give, the less you have to ask. And that's a structural foundation that our EBRGs need to have. So when I think about a big benefit that I've personally had, so we acquired BBVA's U.S. operations about 3 years ago. And so our ERGs, again, real near and core to the DNA of our employees and of our organization. And we found that we had a big gap once we acquired another 10,000 employees, some added states to deploy our EBRGs. And so that's been a big part of my personal work, and probably the number one thing that I'm most proud of 2023. I launched 9 additional Latino EBRGs and 5 additional multicultural EBRGs throughout the United States. But it takes a lot of work. And so when I look, the leaders that we started tapping are new to it. And so I'm excited about the launch, but I'm cautious about its future, because you get leaders that for the first time are managing their day-to-day business, plus this added responsibility that may start off as a passion, but ultimately turns into another real job. You know, my question for the panel is, what do we do for our junior ERG, BRG leaders as they take on new chapters, new responsibilities, to make sure it's not only day one that's successful, but obviously the legacy that BRG creates? And Sid, if we can start with you.
Sure, great question, because many of you and your companies may be in different stages within the movement for ERGs. For example, if you're well established, you may already have a system of how you have your activities, particularly if you have ERG or BRG chapters in different areas where you have them around the country. If your company has chapter systems of your ERG and BRG groups. But one of the things that it's so important to do is, as you have new leaders join your company, even if it's the early career, particularly those that come in an earlier career, is to have a program and system to engage with them immediately. I will tell you that I will never ever forget my first day on the job when I got my first big Wall Street job when I was at the old Smith Barney. For those who may not remember what that firm was, it's now Morgan Stanley. But first of all, I was lost. And secondly, I was incredibly nervous because I'm looking around and there's nobody that looks like me. And then finally, someone reached out and says, "Hey, our Latinos at Smith Barney, we get together and those." I was like, "Latinos, thank God, we got some people here." And I'm like, and I never forget when I got to that group, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is so helpful. I mean, now I don't feel like I'm alone." And then that made me feel empowered to get more involved in my own department. It says, "Hey, can I help organize the Latinos within the research department?" Someone else does the investment banking department. Someone might do the marketing department, the accounting department, the compliance department, the legal department. As you can see where this all goes. And as you're doing that, and then as you're rising up, you're bringing your ERG and BRG put together that it helps in those areas. One of the things that I did that was actually one of my Wall Street legacies at the time was that since I was in equity research, I said, how can we develop more of our junior associates to become senior Wall Street financial analysts and managing directors? And so I helped create what's called a mock morning call. For those that work on Wall Street, you know what I'm talking about. For those that don't, just follow me. Every morning at 7:30 in the morning at every single Wall Street investment firm, everyone has a morning call. It's at 7:30 a.m. Eastern time, and it's always Eastern time, so it's 6:30 if you're in Chicago. It's 4:30 a.m. if you're in San Francisco. It doesn't matter what time zone you're in, it's always 7:30, whether you're at any Wall Street firm. And I said, well, what if I did a mock morning call for the juniors so that they can learn how to be on these morning calls? And they said, great idea. And so they did that, and then they did that for years. And that came as a result of how we talked to our ERGs and BRGs, because we said, how can we be a source of energy? How can we not only help develop Wall Street executive leaders, but also making that a positive way to strengthen the pipeline? And those are just some one of the things that we can that we can do, but it's going to require you to actually take a proactive approach. Don't wait for something to just come to you. Create it. If there's a vacuum, then fill it yourself. Don't wait for someone else to fill it. And then make sure that you're encouraging those younger members to participate, be active. And then when you're doing this, be vocal in letting everyone know what you're doing. Sometimes we're taught as Latinos, and I know this was taught in my family, just keep your head down, let your work speak for itself, and then if you do that, it'll all get noticed. I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you, that does not work in a corporate setting. You must speak for your work. And that includes you speaking for the work of your ERG and BRG group so that the executive leaders know what you're doing. So the success of that mock morning call, I was like, yeah, Mr. Director of Global Equity Research, look what we did. Look what I did. Look what we're doing as a group. And then they knew it. And then when promotion time came, they said, congratulations, we're promoting you. And I started the mailroom, went all the way to managing director, and no different than any one of you, and did that before the board of directors of HACR yanked me away from my Wall Street job and put me in a role that I love so much. But it allows me to see how we can share those thought leaderships. But those are some of the key things.
And before we go to Maryanne, Sid touched on you're speaking for your work, and we take for granted and we think that everyone's there to do that, and that's probably where in a lot of cases we have some unsung heroes because we just believe the work speaks for itself. If it wasn't for programs like here in ACE and HACR, like as I sat in one of Sid's Young Hispanic Corporate Achiever sessions, like I guess almost, 7, 8 years ago, like that was the spark that needed to then say, I have to be louder. And so today the work may be the right work, just no one's there to listen or no one's speaking enough about it. So like that's such an immediate, an easy call to action, the pride in the work that we have, but make sure the audience is big enough and it's filled with decision makers, P&L owners, HR, other advocates as we continue to build the narrative. Maryanne?
Yeah, no, great points on both sides. Sid mentioned, talking about putting our head down, only speaking up when we need to. There's two things, because I do believe it's a two-way street. First and foremost, we have to learn, our leaders need to learn how to engage Latino talent. Are they culturally competent to understand why we behave and act the way we do in the workplace? On the second side is, as Sid mentioned, sometimes we're gonna just have to figure it out and find our own way, create our own professional development, seek outside external resources to understand what it is that we need, what are our gaps, what are our strengths to be able to be a better professional. One of the common things that I see from young ERG leaders and young professionals is the fact that they're trying to navigate a workplace, an organization that wasn't necessarily built for them, right? And so when you understand our cultural narratives and how we operate, it makes a big difference. And I'm gonna hone in on a couple of them. Because I'm gonna ask you, there are, according to research, there are 7 Latino cultural scripts. Raise your hand if you can name all of them. I'll give you $100. Besides Eduardo, you're on the board, stop it. So this comes to tell that we're not even aware of our own cultural scripts and how they really do influence our day-to-day behaviors, not only at work, but at home. And I'll give you a quick example that I love to share. It's this concept of respect. Raise your hand if you grew up in a household where everything was about respeto. So as a result, we're told, Mariana, well, at least for me, it's like, Mariana, no digas eso. Mariana, when the elders walk in, you do what? You walk out. You don't push back, you don't ask questions, because you're challenging authority. And so when young Latino professionals and ERG leaders make it to the table, how does that translate? It's very difficult. So now all of a sudden, we have to learn how to navigate corporate America. Now, the concept of respect is valuable. We have to respect one another. But at the same time, we also have to understand that in the workplace, corporate America, they want someone to be assertive. Now the question is, can you be respectful and assertive at the same time? No los oigo. Yes, absolutely. It's not so much what we say, it is how we say it. And that is one thing that I see a gap in our young Latino professionals and our ERG leaders. Can we give them professional development to have those crucial conversations, to give them even just sentence stems of how and what and why, to be able to communicate effectively, because they can't. So I'll stop there.
Mariana, excellent. Appreciate both. And I think of 2 examples that I'd say I try to highlight and spotlight as much as I can as the case for why. And so there's a lot of value in data. But one of the things was living through it. So as I joined the organization, I had a very charismatic leader pull me into my first PNC EBRG. And that was the Asian American EBRG. That's my first one I joined roughly 10 years ago. So I'm not Cuban Colombian, or Cuba-Lumbian for short. And so as I joined and I got to learn about Diwali, remember the session, learned a ton about Lakshmi, Festival of Lights, and got to connect with some of our employees, some that were mine, some that were in other regions, so the connection to talent. But I remember I found myself about a week later in an event in which we were sponsoring for a pretty large but local Indian community. And as kind of the senior person in the room, hey, Jeff, do you want the mic? Say thank you. And I think people assumed, the normal non-connected jargon. Hey, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your business, the normal stuff. But I started talking and extracted from what I had learned from that EBRG session. And I just remember the mouths dropping across the 200, 300 people in that room. Because I was no longer just a figurehead, a line of business leader, an important person. Like, I was part of the community. Like, they were probably wondering why this Latino knew as much as I did at the moment that connected with them. I remember that event sparked, especially for me, the value of the institution. But now I pass that along for that younger group that says, well, why? God, Jeff, that's more work. Do I get paid more? No. Is there a bonus in there? No. But let me tell you what I can give you is even better than that. And so make sure you have those examples. And if you don't, we have to work harder, because that's what keeps the engine running. The second part, as I started with around data. So what I started to figure out as our EBRGs grew and grew, and I saw people getting promoted that were at these events, that were taking part of not only leadership roles, but in development courses. And so I go to HR and I said, can you run me like similar characteristics internally around employees and their rate to be promoted? Level of education, year-end rating, time and role, EBRG, number of EBRGs. And so what we found out, which I knew because I felt it from being in the room, was that being part of an EBRG was a top 5 predictor of promotion. You got that if you held a leadership role within EBRG, it became one of the top 3 indicators of a promotion. So imagine those 2 examples that I gave, and you were able to say that broadly in your organization. That junior line starts becoming a longer one, starts becoming a higher level of talent because they see it connected through their ambition and also the connection back to their community. And then lastly, the part that I'd add is as a leader, you're in there, if you're starting one new, you got to pick it. So in some of the ones that I mentioned we launched, I went to someone that was probably more mid-level and they would think, hey, maybe EBRG leadership was past their development at this point. But I couldn't risk, again, not having the right momentum. And I said, well, talk to me about what you do in the day job. Have you ever started something brand new? Have you ever brought an entire leadership together from scratch? Have you ever put together a large event or launch for the first time? So things that I knew they couldn't find in their day job. They said, no, I haven't done that. Haven't. So great. So this seems like the right job. But they had the clout, the credibility to be able to gather those around them. And so we've been able to launch really great success. And the idea and clarity was like, hey, this is not your forever work. Like you need to do this well for the first year or 2, and then start setting up your legacy behind you. So your vice president should be someone that you believe can take the reins down the time. And so you have to be thoughtful. I think where I've seen, and internally, chapters fail. It's just like, hey, who in the room wants to be the president? Oh, I'll be it. Like, no, look, like, well, are they good at their day job? Because if they're not, they're probably not going to be good at the EBRG job. And so it's just being real intentional and thought out versus winging it. And then, because you can't get there, you can't get to the ROI, you're not going to show those stats if at the core you haven't gotten the right leadership team, the right talent, and the right pipeline to continue to drive that ERG growth going forward. So,
can I build on what you just said, Jeff? Because what he just said is so incredibly on target, and you know, I hope everyone listen closely because everything you said is absolutely positively on target. I'm going to add something that all of you should think about in terms of your BRG group, your ARG group, your ERGs. I actually like BRG because BRG sounds like it's business. Yep. It's a business resource group. If it's not called a BRG group, consider changing it to a BRG group because, again, source of energy, use of energy, and business is a source of energy. So I would encourage you to consider if your group is not called a BRG group, to consider calling it a BRG group. But with that being said, you heard Jeff talk about credibility a lot, and I want to build on this even further so you can really see the power of this. Is that the executive leadership, from the board of directors to the CEO to the executive committee of the CEO and all the different levels that are below that C-suite, is they are making decisions based on what they believe is the most credible direction. Now, what is credibility? I want you to remember this because this is going to make you ask yourselves, not only individually as a leader at your company, but also as your business resource group thinks about its strategy. Credibility is a function of 3 equations. It's your achievement multiplied by time multiplied by visibility equals your credibility. Let me say that again. Your credibility is your achievements multiplied by time multiplied by visibility equals your credibility. And so why do I share this not only as individuals, but also as your BRG group? That is that from the executive leadership perspective, they are going to look at the areas of their business that are the most credible and predictable on how they can move their business in that right direction. And if you are achieving as a BRG group, and you're doing it over a prolonged period of time, and you're visible in sharing what you're doing, your credibility goes way up, and credibility attracts sponsorship. When you are a credible employee, when you are a credible BRG group, it will attract sponsorship not only for you for promotions, or possibly even your BRG group being elevated to a higher priority where it's no longer a budget, it's an investment. And so when you go from an ERG budget to an ERG investment, then now the company protects their funding of their BRG groups because they know that because of your high credibility, that it's going to lead to that strong ROI. So this applies whether you're the BRG group, the BRG group leader, which as Jeff mentioned is absolutely correct, your chances of getting promoted goes way up, especially if you step forward as the BRG group. But here's the other benefit, and this is one of those hidden benefits that you also may not always realize. The one thing I hear from company employees and BRG groups is, how do I get access to the higher levels of leadership? You may be in a business where you're not allowed to go anywhere beyond your direct report to get permission to go to someone that's higher or even higher than that. The best workaround of that protocol is your BRG groups, because your executive leadership are far more likely to say, I'll meet with you in your BRG group capacity compared to your actual job role, where there is a hierarchy and a reporting system. The BRG is the only workaround that can help get you those visibility to higher sponsors, where they now begin to sponsor you because your resume and your skill set got you the job that you have. But it's going to be the sponsorship that's going to get you into the senior and executive roles, and that is a function of your visibility and particularly your credibility as well as the credibility of your group. Every CEO is involved in external activities. The easiest ones is like, some of them are involved with like United Way, American Heart Association, Habitat for Humanity, all these local charities. If you find out which of these charities your CEO is involved with, and then you as a BRG group say, we're going to support that BRG group, guess who you have access to? Your CEO. And then guess who's likely to potentially sponsor you or even recommend promotions? And if your CEO knows what you're doing, you will be amazed. That's one of the best workarounds. And so you have a lot of power to be able to become more visible, but it requires you to think about your credibility and the credibility of your BRG group. Remember, credibility, your achievements, not your skill set, not your experience, your achievements. Don't confuse achievements with just experience and skill set. You could have 30 years of experience. That's not 30 years of achievement. It's not the same. It's achievement multiplied by time, multiplied by your visibility, equals your credibility. When you focus on that, you'll be amazed at where it will take your BRG group and where it will take you up the ladder of success.
I love that. I'm going to take it one step further and tell you to be a LinkedIn stalker, like not in a negative way, like in a positive way. How many of you are following your CEO on LinkedIn? Okay, that's good. For those of you that we're all following Sid. So if you didn't raise your hand, you might want to consider doing it. Start following the leaders in your organization. If you are that ERG leader in your organization, start being the shameless promoter like no other. What are you doing? When are you doing it? Why are you doing it? Voice it on your social media, particularly LinkedIn, and showcase who you are, what you're doing, and the impact that you're having with your organization as an ERG leader.
Very, very well said. Back to visibility. make sure you connect with both of these tremendous leaders and continue to get these nuggets beyond today. Maryanne, we'll jump to kind of the next important piece. And as this kind of started with, tough environment, you look at recent data, employee morale continues to be challenged, engagement, visibility, all the things that, again, I mentioned ERG, BRG can be the oasis for. As you think about BRGs as a whole, how do you tackle kind of the true impact of what we're feeling versus maybe just topics that are on the surface? Like, how do we arm, empower, challenge our BRGs to be out there really talking about what's on our employees' minds, even though we know it can be a very sensitive topic, whether just to be had on a one-on-one basis or even from some of our senior leaders that may not want that title of that next meeting to be disengaged employees. How do we help,
This is such a great question. I'm sure all of you have participated at one point or another in like employee engagement, right? Studies in your organization. It's interesting. There was a report recently that said that 39% of ERG's members felt a level of satisfaction within their organization. Why do you think that is? What does the ERG provide to them? Community, family, ¿qué más? A voice, representation, safe space. So when I think about the employee satisfaction within ERGs, if you're an ERG leader, do you understand the power that you hold? You are leading a number, every ERG is different and the sizes are different. It can be, I've heard from 20 people, year one to 500, 600, 1,000 people. And so as an ERG leader, being able to tackle these problems, you are at the forefront to be able to understand what are the needs, what are the wants, gaps, how can you address that to be the voice for your membership. One of the things that I see day in and out as well with some organizations that are doing it well is that there is so much collaboratism between the HR function and the ERGs. I won't mention the name of the company, but when I worked with them, I was so happily surprised at how the CHRO, the Chief Diversity Officer, and the ERG leader were working together. They pulled budgets together, and they created an inclusive program, not just for the Latino ERG, but for all ERGs. So how are we tackling the issues that we're facing? The reality of it is that what we're facing, our fellow brothers and sisters on the other side are also facing too. And so creating that mindset of inclusiveness as a whole within the organization can get us to the other side to understand that we're a lot more similar than different with some cultural nuances. And we just tend to focus on family and sometimes food, right? So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Thank you. Sid?
I look at the current environment that we're in. And here's how at HACR that we have been not only recommending this to companies, their CEOs, and also their BRG groups. How many of you are familiar with Star Wars? We all know Star Wars. So, I'm going to start with episode 4 because I'm going to skip episode 1, 2, and 3 because that came later in years. Let's go to episode 4. A New Hope. They came and they were and they had to destroy the Death Star and all that stuff that happened there. And I equate that to a lot of the successes that we did in now the civil rights and social justice and the equality movement. And then we made incredible progress. But then all of a sudden, the empire struck back with that Supreme Court decision that happened last year, and now you're seeing the anti-DEI Darth Vaders that are out there thinking that the emperor and the empire is about to come back and try to push us back. But then the return of the DEI Jedi is coming. And I want us to think about us being those Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia's, that the Force is with us, that we are now getting ready to now begin to elevate our voices, and we're not going to let that anti-DEI movement win when we know that the force is on our side. For those that are religious, that we know that God's on our side, that we know that we have the energy and what it takes. But here is what all of us are going to need to think about. Number one, if you're in a meeting, I want you to remember this. If you've been invited to the seat, you've been invited to speak. When you're in a meeting, do not remain silent in that meeting. If you've been invited to the seat, you've been invited to speak. Make sure that you speak up about the importance of your ERG and BRG groups, about why it's so pivotal. Make sure that you're contributing your thought leadership. When I've been to the World Economic Forum 6 times. I've been a speaker in their Davos events 4 times. Every time I go, I always start my remarks by saying this, and this is the Latino side of why this is so important. And remember, this is Davos, so as Maryanne knows, this is people around the world, everyone there. I said, it's great that we're all here with people from around the country and around the world, but if I named you a country that is the 5th largest economy in the world, that's dollar denominated, so there's no currency risk, that if Moody's or Fitch were to rate us, we'd be AAA rated, so there's no sovereign debt risk, that is growing faster than every G20 country, that is English dominant, that is the 2nd largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, that's in a strong regulatory environment, so there's no regulatory risk, with an average age of 28 and a mode age of 11. Would you take your international budgetary dollars and invest it in that country? They would all say, is it India? Is it Turkey? Is it South Korea? I said, no. That's the US Latino community. We are not only a US force, we are a global economic force. If Latinos in the US stop spending, it would lead to a global economic collapse. China would collapse, the EU would collapse, the whole world could economically collapse if Latinos in the US stop spending. I want you to think about the power of that when you go back to your companies and say, we are the ERG, BRG group that represents the largest economic force of any ethnic group in the world, and your business is dependent on us, and we are going to be a source of energy. And as you come with different ideas, always remember that you take some great ideas, some thoughtful ideas, and then plan to achieve it, but then dare to exceed it. Then great results you will see, and you'll be amazed at where that will take you.
Yeah. Awesome. If this could only turn into a lightsaber right now, I mean, it looks like one.
Well, I got a one for you because you said Return of the Jedi. It's like return on inclusion, right? Let's focus on that. ROI. Let's go.
Yeah. Awesome. I mean, the one part that I'd add in kind of just driving that value is, for me, I've gone to ERG events, BRG events, where, it feels like you're preaching to the choir, right? Like, this audience now, you're passionate for a reason. You're in the roles, it's your job, you have a burning desire to see the change and be the change. And so one of the things I started to institute a couple years back is you have to bring a +1 as an ally. And then what that started to do in changing in the room was the audience became less of a preaching to the choir than sparking the change that is needed fundamentally and organizationally. And really through allyship, it's where I started to see, as you got that seat on the table, people wanted to speak up, just not because someone else would nod the head in agreement. It's because you were starting to change the mindset of those in and around you. And so take a look at your next event, virtual or in person. You should really strike for that 50-50 balance. Allyship, promotership, and then again, I think you'll really see that continued spark that we have. I know as we wrap up with time, and I think of one of the last questions around how does that continue then to drive an improved morale? How does that continue to improve our work set? And who are like retail leaders, like companies around the room that have a large non-exempt employee base, because I have a question as I get to hold the mic, but I think it's something I'd like to hear. Who has like a large non-exempt employee base? Like I have, like I think of my bankers, tellers, anyone that's 40 hours. Like as you think of engagement, what do we do with those employees? So I'll tell you personally for me, I get, well, Jeff, I don't know, I have to get back. And even engagement, well, I have 2 kids at home. I would love to make that event and be engaged, but I have to go home. Or I can't get paid for that, Jeff. Like I can't afford to drive an extra 10 miles, pay an extra toll, parking, even though I know you're speaking at it. So maybe as we think about engagement, maybe our at-risk employees that today just can't afford, don't have time, or don't have the personal structure to be able to get in front of what we know is the oasis of employee engagement. So maybe a quick 1 to 2 minute answer.
I'll say 1 to 2 minutes is that you are the answer to the challenges that are facing your companies, particularly if, for example, if you do have a lot of non-exempt employees, where you can be that resource and work with your companies to see how you can engage with them. And for those of you that may have different structures, one thing to remember is that there's an old saying that you follow the leader in constant times, but you take leadership in changing times. And are we not in changing times? If we're in changing times, this means that this is the best opportunity for you to step forward and to step up and to be able to make that difference. And that's going to resonate all around with your companies. And I'll say one last thing is make sure that you're promoting to have different ERG executive sponsors. Often we share that it's good to rotate every 3 to 4 years, so that way different executive leaders happen. But the reason why is because it also helps build executive allies at the highest levels. So that way, the more that have had experience, say even for the ERG executive sponsor that was for your group, and even if they rotate, it's not like the person that was there is still not championing for you. So you're giving more executive leaders a chance to do that, because for them it's reverse mentorship. They may be mentoring you on how to move the ladder, but you're mentoring them on how to create a great corporate culture. It goes both ways. And so when you look at it from that strategy, you will be amazed at how it will empower your group.
Awesome.
Okay, I know. 1 minute, real quick. 2 things. First and foremost, you need to be able to engage internally and externally with those resources. What are the resources internally within your organization for you to leverage across industry, right? Like whatever that may be. And then externally, what associations? You've got ACE, you've got HACR, you've got SHIP, so many other organizations and associations that you can be leveraging resources. Some of these resources are free, gratis, that you can leverage to support those employees, because one of the gaps that I do see for those non-exempt employees is time constraints. Yeah? Family is important. Latinas, do we run home to pick up the kids or do we go networking? I don't know. Sometimes it's a hard choice, right? My kids are older, so feed yourself. But the next thing, too, is I want you to walk away and promise yourself that you'll be advocate for your neighbor, okay? Because without each other, we are not going to change this narrative. And I want to highlight a couple of people today because they've done a phenomenal job at doing this exactly. At AbbVie, I've got my dear friend Refugio, who is now an author and is always with the mindset of push up and pull up, and always pushing up his fellow neighbors. Jen, Cynthia from AT&T, they do a phenomenal job. So remember to advocate for one another.
Awesome. One last nugget I'll add, and again, kind of as you push on your executive sponsors, start of 2023, we got something through in work in tandem with our HR partners to approve 4 hours annually of paid added development time for our non-exempt employees. And so we took the excuse out. We empowered our employees. It was an engine that says, it's in your schedule. Hey, boss, I'm putting 2 hours for employee development because I want to hear Sid speak at the next Latino EBRG event. So figure out the rails of which you can create it. Take the excuse out. There's value in it. Push on your executive leaders to do it because there's an absolute ROI for it. So, Roger, keep me honest. Do we have time for any questions, or we're just going to clap at this moment? No, that's why I stopped us, so we have time. Okay. So, we're going to open it up. If anyone has Sure. Awesome. Question right up here. It's coming. Check, check, check.
Hello, my name is Wendy Holmes. I'm with Comerica Bank. So at our organization, we have both employee resource groups and business resource groups. My question is, as someone who's the program manager for employee resource groups, what are some ways that we can measure our value versus our business resource groups that is primarily revenue generation? How do we measure, what are some ideas that we can measure our value as it pertains to inclusion and belonging?
I know, Sid, you had a note on that before. I don't know if you want to kick off.
Yeah, so I think that depending on structure, by the way, Comerica, you guys have been great. We've had your CEO actually in our CEO roundtable before, and I know that there's a strong commitment there for inclusion. I think that the first question that has to happen is how do you take the employee resource group, if that is if it's a initiative of human resources, and if business resource is an initiative of a different group, maybe it's marketing, it might be sales, possibly, if that's the structure at Comerica. But how do you all have that communication to share your best practices so that the BRGs and the ERGs are collaborating and sharing those? Because once that happens, now it's no longer siloed and it becomes part of the entire enterprise operation. But it may require the leaders from each of the groups to know how they can consistently get together and meet, and then have those opportunities to share those best practices, and then see how that comes together towards a common business outcome. Because even if you are an employee resource group, we all have business outcomes. We all have the goals that we have to set as employees, and then certainly as a group. So I think the key thing is to align it, and it's going to require that that communication, because it can't always just be an HR product by itself. Because when it happens that way, then you may be perceived, whether it's right or wrong, it may be perceived as you're a use of energy and you're a budget. Whereas the BRG is an investment, and you want to become a source of energy, not a use of energy. And the way to do that is to start aligning with the actual those that are making those business decisions.
Part that I'd add is I'm a firm believer engaged employees create engaged clients. And so if you're at the core, and you'd say the starting or building block for what ultimately enables BRGs to go further, it's being able to have the concise data that tells that story narrative. I would also then find what intersections today should be, to Sid's point, in the collaboration that we're missing. And so not only within ERGs and BRGs, but across different lines of business. Like after this, I'll moderate a working parents EBRG along with a military EBRG, because we found more similarities than not. And so find those intersections amongst chapters, amongst lines of businesses, and you'll find through collaboration, whether you combine them, whether you're separate, you'll just be in unison of a similar mission and a clear goal. Next question.
We actually have a question from our virtual audience.
Perfect.
Hello, virtual.
Yes, from Camila Godoy. She says, what advice do you have to create community when your ERG members are spread over different locations and in a hybrid environment?
I'll kick it off. Well, I mean, I'm assuming that most of you are doing some pulse checks, right? And so when you do that pulse check with your ERG members, what is it that they're looking for? What is it that they're needing? And we're in a virtual remote world, right? How are you delivering that need? The level of engagement and the level of takeaway. One of the things that I see is that when you do have these virtual programs, you need to make sure that it becomes sticky. And what I mean by that is just don't have them show up, stay there for an hour and walk away. What are they walking away with? And what is it that is tangible so they can put into practice right away? That way they feel that their time is being valuable, participating, and that they're walking with something that is tangible that they can implement within their organization and function.
So I'll add to that virtual is your company's best friend. And let me explain why. As you've been hearing me say, source of energy, use of energy. If you're at a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 company, chances are you have operations all over the country and all over the world. Your company is not going to budgetarily support having all of you fly into one location for one big powwow. There are some that are doing more than others. I know, for example, AT&T has their employee group conference. I was a speaker at that a few years ago. They fly in 1,000. But I also know that there's a big application process because you just can't possibly get everyone there in the same room. But having a virtual strategy actually helps you. I've done so many ERG group presentations where they'll ask me to go into one location and then they'll loop everybody else in where they'll convene in a conference room and then we'll have a conversation with all the different chapters. But it's even easier than that. It could be as easy as just organizing a virtual ERG gathering right in front of your own workstation, and then you can still have some great engagements. And it could be engagements as a group, which you may do a few times a year. It might be your ERG group leaders that they do this. It might even be the ERG group leaders among the other ERG group leaders and how they engage. But virtual is your best friend. Don't feel that it hurts you. It actually helps you.
Yeah, awesome. And, the one part where I'll add is, again, if you think about virtual being an enabler, and I think about our ability now to record sessions, so that puts flexibility to our, not only just virtual employees, but those that, like for me, running branches that can't log on to at 2 p.m. to hear the right person. So at 5 o'clock when it's different, and less clients, they're able to then log in. And so it's truly an enabler. I would say assess both. And so I've had, and we've learned from, we'd have Sid talk in person and then talk virtual. Well, is the engagement the same? And if not, are we creating the same engagement, or is it just definitively different? Because, it's virtual, it doesn't have to be as captivating or maybe as question or audience involved. And so assess where you're at, and then ultimately, you'll realize the value that you bring. And so I'll end by saying just a tremendous thank you to Maryanne, Sid, just tremendous nuggets. I know we had a couple more questions. So I know we'll be around. Make sure you add them both on LinkedIn. Ask those questions. It's been an absolute pleasure today being with this group. Hopefully we've gotten the conference, the morning started off right. Hopefully you have more things to do than acknowledging just the things that you've done. And that's both a gift and a curse of the seats that we hold. But it's an absolute pleasure. And
Yeah, I want you to walk away with something. I don't normally do this, but I love Patricia, and I love the mission, and I'm very much aligned. If you find me on LinkedIn, I will give you a free Latino career assessment for you to take and walk away with a self-development guide.
Boom.
Boom, absolutely. Great way to end that. And also a big thank you to Jeff Martinez again. He is the Executive Vice President. He's not just Associate VP. He's not just a VP. He's not a Senior VP. He is the Executive Vice President at PNC and took time from his multi-billion-dollar budgetary P&L to be here to moderate. So
And with
thank
that,
you.
yeah, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I'll see everyone out there.
Let's
Thank
give
you.
them a round of applause.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Maryanne.
Sid. Thank you, Mariana. Thank you, Jeff.
Dr. Robert Rodriguez, and we're just waiting on Wanda and Fabio. Fabio's actually right here. He's right there with the glasses.
Okay. Wanda is not here yet.
Wanda should probably be.
Let me put my bag.
Oh, here's Wanda right there.
Let me say hi.
¿Cómo estás? Bien, bien.